I just wanted to quickly go over the supplies that I used in order to create this turtle. The first thing that I used was of course, the Liquitex Acrylic Inks. I used the green here. It's this green yellow oxide, and it's Phthalocyanne green, something like that, yellow shade for the green. And the blue is the Liquitex Acrylic Ink, and it's the Cerulean Blue Hue. So anyways, even if I'm not pronouncing these exactly right, because they are some bigger words and I'm not very good at pronouncing things, I will have these listed in the description below. So I used both those. I used the set of 6 earth colors out of the QOR, or the core is what they call them, and they're watercolors. Out of the 10 of 6, I used the, here we go, probably hard words for me here, transparent brown oxide, Naples yellow, I used the indigo, I used the Venetian red, and I used the raw umber. Out of basically the set of 6, if you have this tin and the earth colors, I used every single color except for the green that's in here. So those are the colors that I used. Also, on the watercolor pencils that I did use, I picked these out just because of how opaque they are, but they are the Caran Museum Aquarelle pencils. I used Cassel Earth. I used Ivory black, just in some areas, not all over the place though. Maybe for like the eyes or maybe the mouth, just anything really dark. I used yellow ochre. I used my raw umber. I used my Russet. And I used my Sepia 50%. And that's what I used for my colors. Like I said, they will be listed in the description below, but those were the watercolor pencils that I used. The paper that I used is the Dura-Bright white, and that's what I used for the paper itself. And then at the very end, I did not have this shown, but you can use it. I rarely even used it, maybe for a little sprinkle in the eye or maybe an area that I wanted a little bit more whiter. I used the Dr.Ph Martin's Bleed Proof White, and it really comes kind of chunky. It doesn't even move, but I just scooped a little bit of it out, put it on your palette, add some water to it, and it turns into watercolor, like a more opaque watercolor. So that's all that I used in creating this turtle. So let's go ahead and jump on over and we can start the turtle. All right, so here I'm starting out with my paper. I'm going to remove one sheet of paper off of my Dura-Bright paper pad here. This is a 9x12 sheet. Also, the reference photo, if you guys are wanting this, so that way you can trace it over and then be able to transfer it to your board. It is from Pixabay. It is royalty free and for you to use. So I will have the link in the description below for you guys. But here I am just measuring out about 2 centimeters. It's just really not much of an edge. I just wanted it barely there. So here I am just kind of measuring out, putting marks. I usually do 1 mark on either end, 1 in the middle. So that way I kind of got 3 marks to go by. That way I'm not going too off, track. So after I get my lines drawn in, I'm going to go ahead and get my tape out. Now, this tape here is the Pro Artist tape. It is acid-free and pH neutral, so it is safe for your artwork, but it does not hold as much water as we're going to put on it. It will stay stuck to your paper. It just seems to bleed under it here and there, so that does happen, especially with the amount of water that we're going to be using. So here is my drawing on a piece of tracing paper, so that way I can transfer my drawing onto my paper. You definitely don't want a bunch of marks all over your paper, so even if you want to draw this out, you can, but then make sure that you trace it, and that way you can transfer it. That way there's not a whole bunch of eraser marks. So you can do it either way you want. It does not matter. You can either trace it off of your reference photo, or you can freehand draw it on another paper and then go ahead and trace it and transfer it to your paper that you're going to be doing this design on. So here I am just going ahead and tracing all of it out. Now, I did not have like all the wrinkles and all that stuff, just basically general areas to kind of look at, like his shell or maybe certain little parts of his head, like that had that kind of shell kind of look to it. I did have some of the bigger ones drawn out, so that way I know where they are and have an idea of where other ones would go. But as far as all those little bitty wrinkles, I would not worry about putting all those in. You can put them in as you go when you're doing your painting. So now here I am taking out the Liquitex Acrylic Inks. I've got the green, yellow shade, and I got the Cerulean Blue. At least I hope that's how you pronounce it. But you never know. I like to pronounce things wrong, so. But it's okay. At least I got it written below correctly for you guys. So I'm putting some of this in, then I'm putting on the other side a little bit of the blue, and then putting a couple drops of the green in there, so that way it can kind of make more of a teal kind of color. Stirring that on up. And if I need to add some more green to it, I will just scoop it up from my green and throw it on in there. Maybe a little bit of blue. So I'll go back and forth until I get the tone or the color shade that I'm wanting. So once that's done, I'm going to put this on my paper. Now I'm going to put some of the color in there, but I'm going to kind of go back and forth between all three colors, just as long as I'm getting enough of the pigment on the paper, putting in some of these random colors of green in there and blue, and then some of the teal. Now I'm going to slowly kind of go around my turtle. I don't want to get too carried away around my turtle, otherwise he'll be covered up. So I don't want to do that. I want to just take my brush and go around the turtle. Making sure I got everything covered. Now I'm going to go around the outside of the turtle here. Just kind of putting in some of those greens, blues, and teals. Now, at first when you do this, you're going to think, oh my gosh, you know, it's kind of like this little bit of a mess. That's okay. As long as we are doing the outline of the turtle and we're not going into the turtle, it should be fine. So here I am putting in some more greens. Just making sure I get everything saturated with the ink. Now this Dura-Bright we did try out before, and it doesn't absorb any of the water. So this will just sit there until it dries. So after I get my pigments in there, kind of make like some little swirls. I was like swirling it around. I was like, okay, I think I got enough of the pigment in there to where I can end up going on top of it with a water brush. So I'm making sure I got some colors in there, the designs that I want. Now here I am. I was just cleaning off my brush real quick. Now I'm coming in here with this water dropper. It's just a water brush, and I'm just not even touching it. I'm just squirting water drops on top. That's all I'm doing. Just dropping some water droplets, as you can see, on top. And it's making like these beautiful little circles. So I really did like this look. Now, the thing that I can say is once you put enough water droplets in there, they like get a design that you're kind of wanting, and you do this all over, just keep in mind that you can always go back if you want and take your brush and kind of swirl some of these colors here and there if you want, or you can just leave it the way it is. But here's the thing, it's going to take a while to dry, especially as much water as I was adding on this paper. I was adding quite a bit of water. So it took me basically, I worked in the evening on this, and it basically took all night to dry. And the one thing that I do have to warn you guys on this is if it dries, do not go and take your finger and decide it's so pretty, I want to rub my finger across it just because if you do that, there are some areas that could be a little bit thicker in pigment, and it could end up being a little bit wet still. Or it could have like a little bit of like a thicker pigment that's a little bit higher up than the more thinned out pigment. So when you rub your finger across, you can totally knock a whole piece of ink off the paper. which is not good. I mean, you can still cover it up by going over the ink again, which I had to do because little old me in the middle of the night decided that she wanted to rub her finger all the way across it and made a big smudge. So yeah, I had to go back in and add some more pigment to the paper in the middle of the night. Yes, but anyways, so just a lesson learned, do not rub your finger across it. Just leave it. It's pretty, just don't touch. So here I am, just kind of getting some of these colors mixed in right beside his little flipper there. Just kind of swirling it in that area. Putting a couple drops in here and there of the water. Swirling it around with my brush. If I want to swirl it here or there, you can kind of do what you want, whatever you design or whatever makes you feel happy on your design in there. Then I went up on top and I started to do the same thing. The only thing is I added way too much water and it started pulling up really big. And I got a little bit afraid that it was going to come down into my shell of my turtle there. So I had to take out a paper towel. I tried to scoot some of the ink off into the tape too, just trying to get it to go away from my turtle. But I decided that it would probably be safer instead of just doing that, but to take my paper towel and just kind of soak up some of that water just to play it safe. Definitely didn't want no accidents. So here I am, just taking some more of these little colors, mixing them up, adding a little bit more of a teal color to the top. Now, just another note though, after this dries, it's going to end up looking kind of funny. I mean, it's sometimes if you have an unlevel surface, it may actually dry and start pushing forward one way or the other, but it's certainly just fine. It ends up coming out really good. So here's the core set of 6 earth colors, watercolors that I'm going to be using next. Of course, I showed that in the very beginning. And I am actually going to be using, like I said, every single color in this tin except for the green. The reason why I didn't choose the green is because there really wasn't too much green in my turtle. And if there was any, I would rather make it up myself because I don't want it to have any greens. Like, I didn't want no greens. I didn't want nothing to like kind of make it similar to the outside of the turtle. So I'm going to put a little bit of this in each and every little circle of my palette. And I put way too much paint in my palette, by the way. I noticed that after the fact. I was like, I'm so used to working with watercolors, or not watercolors, but with acrylic paint that I like putting a whole bunch in there. So here's what I'm doing for his head and his marks and his eyes. I am actually going with blue. So I'm just putting on the blue a little bit thicker with not as much water mixed into it. So there's a little bit of water mixed into it, but not enough to where you can see that lighter color blue. It almost looks black, but it's actually not. It's blue. Or they call it indigo. I think indigo in there, but I always call it blue. So here I am putting these in for some of the darker spots around his head, around his neck, and then I'll do it around his legs. But just kind of filling in some of those areas where the dark spots are. Definitely wanted to go with the darker blue, or at least a blue, because I know that if once it dries, I can always go around it with water and make it lighter. So here's some little dots in here that were kind of dark, going in and around his neck, and some around his little fin here, or his little flipper. Just putting in some of those darker areas with the blue. So once that is done, I can come in here and I'm going to work on some of his bigger shell on the top. And he had some really nice, beautiful colors in his shell. So I wanted to do the same kind of thing with him. So adding in some of those colors like the brown oxide, and then using some of the darker raw umber in there too. Like some of those really red, really bright marks, I'll end up using the Venetian red. But for now, we're just using the raw umber and the brown oxide. Making some of those designs and marks, just trying to go in the same way that I see on the reference photo. That's all I'm doing. Doesn't have to be exactly to the reference photo. This is your painting, so you can kind of do what you want on it. Putting in some of that raw umber in and around these little dots. And then as I work my way over toward the top of his fin, it's going to start getting a little lighter. So instead of just using my raw umber, I will be going to more of the Naples yellow. And probably some of the brown oxide too, but mostly the Naples yellow. Pulling in some of those colors in there. Now I'm taking that Naples yellow and I am putting it on the bottom of his shell where it is a little bit lighter. He definitely had some yellows in there, so that Naples yellow definitely comes in handy. Also a note that whenever we go over to our watercolors, pencils, I kind of picked out kind of similar colors to what I used on this. So here's the Venetian red. So you can see that really red, vibrant kind of color popping through. That's the Venetian red. Using some of that yellow, Naples yellow here on the bottom of these shells. But I picked out my watercolor pencils that were similar to the colors that I was using on the turtle already. So that way I'm able to kind of strengthen some of those marks, make them more defined, but yet not something completely like out of the ballpark here. So here I am kind of putting in some of these brown oxide colors in, kind of lighten them down with some of my Naples yellow. And just kind of creating the little bitty marks of his shell. I'm also creating some of those little wrinkles too. So here I am just kind of creating some of those wrinkles that he has going in and around his neck by using some of my Naples yellow. There are some wrinkles that I did put in, and maybe those were just some to just kind of tell me, okay, hey, I need the wrinkles to kind of go in this direction, but I didn't draw in every single wrinkle or anything like that. So here I am with the Naples yellow. I'm just kind of going in and around some of these little marks. Don't worry if the brown starts reactivating. That actually helps it out quite a bit because it gives it a little bit more of a shadow. So putting in some more of these little bitty marks here, showing where some of these wrinkles might just go and in the direction that they show in the reference photo. This little area here was more shadowier, so I used the raw umber mixed in with a little bit of my yellow, or not my yellow oxide, but my Naples yellow. Making up colors, you guys. Those are listed in the description below, so just in case. Also, if you like this, please give this a like. And if you haven't subscribed, subscribe if you could. That definitely helps out the channel. And I'm really hoping that you guys like this tutorial, just kind of showing how I did this. And if this helps you out any, plus that, it's a whole lot of fun, but definitely need you guys to click that like. That definitely helps. We really need the help. We want this channel to grow and be out there for everyone. So here I am taking my blue and I'm just kind of defining some of these lines. Going in and around, making that little nostril hole too. Now I try to take some lighter Naples yellow to kind of get in between these little wrinkles that he had in his eye, and I accidentally added a little bit too much water. That does happen. And I'll show you what you can do to kind of minimize that. So if you end up adding a little bit too much water, like I did around his eye, and then here I am trying to get a little bit of color in there, but then I'm hitting into that pocket of water that's just sitting there kind of going down toward his eye. I tried to scoop it up. It's not working. I'm just pushing that water around. So instead, just take a paper towel and just sop it up. And then after it does that, you can try going over and making your lines, but it ain't going to work because it's just too wet. It's not going to make any defined lines there. So just wait until that dries and then come back over it with your lines and make more of your defined lines after it dries. Now here's a fun part. See these little dark blue circles that we put in there? If you go around it with a wet brush, you'll end up reactivating some of that blue, and you're going to create some lighter blue around those little areas that I put there. And I like doing that. It kind of adds a little bit of a shadow, a little bit more character and depth. So some of that I do reactivate with my brush to give it a little bit more depth to those little circles. And plus that it's a little bit of a lighter blue. If Here I'm working on trying to soften some of these edges that maybe I put in there. And here I am just trying to make some brown lines, just some texture lines, just showing some of the texture that is in his little beak there. Just a note, we'll be able to come back with our watercolor pencils and be able to do that a lot better. So here it is on his little fin. It needed to be shadowed. So what I'm doing is just taking a wet brush, reactivating some of those browns for those little dots and just kind of pushing it in between the spaces that I did not hit with any watercolor. What that does is it makes a really, really soft, very, very light hint of brown. And that definitely, and mixed in with some of that blue too, kind of makes it more of a grayish brown look to it. And that can add shadow where I need it. So just by reactivating those colors and kind of pushing them up can create shadow. Instead of having to add more color to it, use the color that you already have down on the paper. So here I am just fidgeting with some more of these lines, just creating some lines of texture for his little wrinkles that are around his neck. Here I'm just kind of pushing some of that Naples yellow down in between, so that way he doesn't have just straight white, but he has a little bit of a light color, like a Naples yellow color there. Adding some more defined lines around the shell. Then as I noticed, it like had too big of a gap there. So I started pulling some of these colors that were already there, kind of pushing them out and taking away the gaps in the lines. Kind of balancing out all these little shells. So I'm going to pull that over, kind of shape out that line a little bit there. Anything that I see that maybe needs to be softened out, I can soften out just a little bit with some water and just a wet brush. Now here I'm taking some Naples yellow, or at least I will be. And I'll kind of define some of the shell too in here. Like maybe some areas that needed to have a little bit more of that Naples yellow in there. Here I'm adding a couple more spots, and these spots were more of a reddish tone like spots on his skin. So I'm using the Venetian red to kind of come in here and add some of these spots that he had. But not too much, just a little bit here and there. Adding some more Naples yellow, so that way I can go in between some of these areas. Now see some of this blue, it's kind of reactivating, isn't it, whenever I have that wet brush. That's okay, because I can bring some of that blue up into some of these areas here that are just white, and that adds more of a shadow to his head area. So wherever I need it, I can kind of pull and use those colors to make shadows underneath his little chin and mouth here. Making this just a little bit more darker, kind of going in and around that Venetian red. I don't really want to blend out the Venetian red because that would make it too red. So I try and go around those little spots I just made. Adding a little bit more of the Naples yellow. Just very lightly though. I'm have it really, really watered down so that way it's not too yellow, but more of a creamish type of color. Going in and around some of these little areas with my brush, just kind of give it that shadow. Now this is just a wet brush, so it's activating it, but not activating it too much to where I can add more of a shadow in and around his little scales here. And then as I go, I'm going to reactivate some of that Naples yellow too, and then pull that in and around, so that way it's not just plain white, but we got a little bit of a tone in there. Adding a little bit more of my Naples yellow in there to darken up some of those little scales that he has. Throwing some of the Naples yellow back into some of these scales. So here I go, just working on some more of these little lines, more of these little skin tone lines or little wrinkles. Kind of balancing out that little shell there too. I'm going to come back in, start working on this eye, adding a little bit more of the lines around his eye now that it's dry. Coming back in and adding some more little wrinkles here and there. Now you can use some of the brown umber, very watered down brown umber, or maybe even some of the blues. Just kind of adding in some lines here and there, some little textures, because as I go, those textures will just get better. There's more of the brown umber in there for his little wrinkles, some in and around his shell. Has a little bit of a bluish tone that I added to that. Now I'm going to come in and around some of these little areas here because it was a little bit white. And as I'm going, it's just a wet brush is all I'm using, because as I go around this, I'm kind of activating some of that blue that's in there and going in and around on his little scales with reactivating some of that blue makes it look like a shadow. Now, if you have too much in an area and you're wanting to get rid of it, you can always use your bleed proof white by Dr.Ph Martins to kind of bring that white back out if needed. But he really had a lot more of the shadow kind of look in there. Okay, so now that we are done with that, we're going to be doing our last step, which is working with our watercolor pencils. Now, like I said, I'm using the Museum Aquarelle pencils by Caran because they're a little bit more opaque. So here I'm using that black. Like I said, I'm only using the black in like the areas like his eye or maybe his mouth, but that's really about it. Maybe a little bit where it's like super dark right in his nostril area, his mouth. But then I'll come back in with more of my sepia or my raw umber, and I'll be using those to make the darker lines where needed. Here I think I switched over to using my sepia 50% and my Naples yellow or yellow ochre. I can come back in and kind of brighten up some of the colors that I already have down, like that Naples yellow. This works perfect because it looks like the same kind of color. Adding in some of my raw umber in there too to add a little bit more detail or texture to his little beak here. And it's so awesome how this works. You can use those watercolors, but then use the pencils on top to create more texture or define lines or add in more details. So here I am using on his wrinkles to create some more wrinkles in there. I'm using the sepia 50%. I absolutely love this pencil, and I even used it for shadowing too. So not just creating more wrinkles and more defined lines, but also on creating some shadows. Here I notice that there's these lines that are going in and around his little scales, and I'm able to draw them in using my sepia 50%. So just kind of draw them in where you see them on the reference photo. Not all of them had the little lines around them, but just a few of them did. Adding some more of the little wrinkles and textures. Going down. Now I'm adding some more shadow using the same pencil, the 50% sepia. Adding some more of the shadow in there. Now, I'm not covering up the wrinkles that I put in with the same color pencil. I'm just not pushing down that hard. I'm actually going very, very lightly on top of them, so that way you can still see the little wrinkles I put in with the sepia 50% using a lighter hand. Then the wrinkles were pushed down a little bit harder, so that way those would stay. And then now I'm just shading around it. I'm going to do the same thing here. Pushing down a little bit harder to create more of that wrinkle, and then I'm going to lightly go around some of this area here to create more of a shadow, and that defines his shell a little bit more too. Creating some more little textures in there, more little wrinkles. creating more of a little texture in and around these little dots. And now I'm going over to a shell. Now I'm going to use the raw umber. I'm going to use that rust color like I'm using right now, just to kind of define some of these colors and marks that are already in a shell that I put in, and kind of make those pop a little bit more and have them more smoother or defined. So I'm going to be using that raw umber. I'm going to be using that russet color, and I'm going to be using my yellow ochre in there. But this definitely did the thing. I mean, it definitely made it pop. So I loved using these pencils on top of these watercolors. They were so amazing. You don't want to cover up everything, but if there's some areas that look a little rough, yeah, these pencils sure did it. Here, and I'm throwing in some more of those rusty colors. More of my Naples yellow or my yellow ochre. And you can always go the sky's the limit on this, but this was definitely a whole lot of fun. I really did enjoy working on this. And this is all you really need to do. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Here's the final piece. And until next time, bye you guys.